In my last video, I had given you a complete summary of the entire chapter. I had given you a chart of the provisions applicable for registration, the sections as well as rules both. Okay, so now we are starting with the sections. Section number 22. Section number 22. But before I start this section, let us understand the important definition for this section only. And one definition for this section, what is said is, for this section, aggregate turnover Now friend, this is one term which carries different meaning at different places. So for the purpose of this section, aggregate turnover means all supplies, including supplies made on behalf of another. So whatever supplies are being made by a person in his own capacity as well as an agent of somebody else, everything will be included in his turnover. But another thing, in case of job work, when the goods are returned after completion of job work, when goods are returned after job work, the value of goods is not includable in the turnover of job worker. Something very important, because this section is talking about registration based on turnover. So what is called aggregate turnover? Now in the beginning, this is given that for the purpose of this section, it means the same term used in some other section may have a different meaning. Don't go by this for any other section. So under this section, aggregate turnover for a supplier includes value of all the supplies. And when I say all the supplies, so this includes even exempt supplies also. So exempt, which are non-taxable, which have been exempted, which are subject to zero rate, everything will be included in that for determining the term turnover. And in case of job work, when the goods are returned by the job work after completion of the job work, the value of this job work will not include value of the goods on which the job work has been done. What is called job work? Any process or activity on the goods belonging to another registered person. So the ownership of the goods is never with the job worker, so the value is never includable in the turnover of the job worker. So now, subject to this definition, now let us go to other provisions of section 22. Now the subsection 1, this is talking about registration based on turnover. This is subsection 1. This is referring two things for a special category of states and for other parts of the country. A special category of states, north, that is Uttarakhand, Jammu Kashmir. Then going to northeast, starting from Assam, Nagaland, Mizoram, Tripura, Arunachal Pradesh. So all those are 11 states. So for them, turnover of rupees 10 lakhs during the financial year. In the rules, we'll talk about that when the turnover exceeds the limit, the person becomes liable to be registered and he has to make an application for registration within 30 days since he becomes liable to registration. So the turnover exceeds 10 lakh, he should apply for registration, and for other parts of the country, in this case, turnover exceeds rupees 20 lakhs, then he should be making an application for registration, right? Subsection 2 is no more relevant for you because that was for the people who were already paying taxes under earlier laws before the GST became applicable. But subsection 2 simply says they are also required to be registered, right? So their registration will not be transferred automatically, they have to get themselves registered. Now subsection 3, that relates to transfer of business. Subsection 3, this relates to transfer of business. Now whether ownership is changed or this is a case of compromise or merger or amalgamation or demerger, whatever be the situation, in nutshell I can write it in another words, there is a change of permanent account number. So the ownership changes even in case of the transfer within the family to another person, either by consent or in the event of death. Whatever be the situation, if there is a change in the permanent account number of the person to whom business is transferred, the transferee is required to have new registration. Transferee is required to have new registration, right? And when we talk about section 29 and 30, this will come there also, that whenever there is a change of ownership or there is a change of permanent account number due to any situation, maybe a partnership firm is converted into company or a sole proprietorship is converted to partnership firm. So there is a change of status, change of permanent account number. So whenever there is a change, a new registration will always be needed, and that is the time when the old registration is required to be cancelled, right? So just a reference, right? So you can correlate that whenever there is a transfer, new registration is required. So what will happen to the existing registration? That has to be cancelled. For that, a formal application for cancellation has to be made, existing liabilities have to be discharged, and then only the registration will be cancelled, right? The same thing will happen in case of merger amalgamation also, right? But subsection 4 says, in case of merger, amalgamation, demerger, etc., in case of merger, demerger, amalgamation, etc. This is approved by court or tribunal. Now it is no more court, now it is only tribunal, because the earlier cases were pending before the court. So that's why we are using the word court also. So in this case, in case of merger, demerger, amalgamation, etc., which are approved by the court or tribunal, new registration is required to be obtained by transferee. New registration is required to be obtained by transferee. Now another question, as per order of the court or tribunal, merger, demerger, etc. may be effective from a certain date. Now when the transferee should apply for registration? That is important. So the transferee becomes liable for registration from the day on which ROC issues a new certificate of registration of this order, because then only the effect will be given by the ROC. So transferee is liable to be registered since the date of certificate of registration of order issued by registrar of companies. So friend, this is section 22. First of all, we talked about definition of the aggregate turnover. So in general, that includes the value of all the supplies, but in case of job worker, the value of the goods removed by him after carrying out job work does not include value of the goods. Subsection 1 says a person becomes liable to be registered when the turnover during the financial year exceeds 20 lakhs or 10 lakhs. Subsection 2 is talking about the existing people. Subsection 3, that is in case of transfer, the transferee has to obtain a new registration, and subsection 4 says in case of merger, demerger, amalgamation, etc., which are approved by the court or tribunal, the transferee becomes liable to be registered, but from the date on which the certificate of registration is issued by ROC. Right. Now under section 23, some of the people do not require registration at all. Some of the people do not require registration at all. So that is section 23. Section 23. Registration not required. Number 1, any person exclusively engaged in making exempt supplies. Any person exclusively engaged in making exempt supplies. So exempt supplies include even the supplies which are non-taxable. So non-taxable supplies, he is not to be registered. Exempt supplies, he is not to be registered. Right? Number 2, an agriculturist, he does not require registration, but only for supply from supply of cultivation from land. So these are absolutely basic raw agro produce. So in relation to basic agro produce, the concept of GST doesn't apply. That person does not require registration. Subsection 3, this is any other category notified by central government on recommendation of GSTC, that is GST Council. So section 23 is saying that 3 categories of people do not require registration. Number 1, exclusively engaged in making exempt supplies. Number 2, agriculturist, but agriculturist is exempt only in relation to supply of cultivation from land. And third category is any other category which is notified by the central government on the recommendation of GST Council. Now section 24, that says certain persons who are making supplies are necessarily required to be registered irrespective of the turnover, which is referred under section 22. So in section 22 we said that it is based on turnover only. So if the aggregate turnover during the financial year is exceeding 20 lakhs or 10 lakhs, then registration becomes compulsory. But under section 24, whatever be the turnover, irrespective of that, the person is always required to be registered. Right. So section 25, that says notwithstanding anything under section 22(1). So 22(1) says the turnover based registration is compulsory, and this says notwithstanding anything contained in section 22(1), it means irrespective of the turnover, right? But the overriding effect is only on section 22. Following persons require registration. Following persons require registration. So here we have total 12 categories, right? So this number will help you to remember certain things. In that, number 1, person making interstate supplies. What is interstate supply? When the place of service, when the place of supplier and the place of recipient, those happen to be in different states, then that is called interstate, and in respect to the turnover, registration is always needed. Number 2, casual taxable person. Now, who is this casual taxable person? This is defined under section 2 subsection 20. Who is a casual taxable person? Person engaged in supply of goods or services in a state where he doesn't have any fixed place of business. The person who is engaged in making the supplies in his state, and this state is the place where he doesn't have a fixed establishment, and the supply may be made either on his own or as an agent, or in the capacity of agent. So this person is referred as a casual taxable person. So one person who is already registered, say in the state of Rajasthan, he does not make generally interstate supplies. He comes to the state, come to Mumbai, and here he enters into the transaction with certain people, and then he is making the supply here itself within the state. So he will procure the goods from Rajasthan, then bring it here, and then from here he is going to make a supply. Then he is also required to have a registration in the state of Maharashtra, because that is an intra-state supply, and if he is not registered in the state, then the tax will not be paid. So that's why even a casual taxable person is also required to be registered. Number 3, any person liable to pay tax under reverse mechanism. So what is reverse mechanism? That we have already discussed in detail earlier, when the recipient becomes liable to pay. It is not the supplier, but recipient is liable to pay taxes. So in that case, the turnover doesn't make a difference. He has to be registered always. Number 4, this is person required to be registered as per section 9 subsection 5. Now who is this person under section 9(5)? Friend, this is an e-commerce operator. This is an e-commerce operator, and in relation to supply of services of radio taxi, this is just one word, because earlier we have talked about this notification in detail. Then hotel, guest house, then plumber, repair, right? And in these two cases, if the actual supplier is not registered, in this case it is always. So the person who is required to be registered as per section 9 subsection 5, or rather you can say the person who is liable to pay tax because of section 9 subsection 5, he should also be registered. So number 1, person making interstate supplies. Number 2, casual taxable person. Who is casual taxable person? That is defined. Then any person liable to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. So reverse charge is applicable for services as well as goods both. Where it is, that we have already talked about earlier. Number 4, person who is required to be registered because of section 9(5). He is liable to pay tax under section 9 subsection 5. So he should also be registered. So these are 4. Then we are coming to the next, number 5. I said total list is 12. 4 we have already done before. Now comes number 5. This is non-resident taxable person. So first of all, he is a non-resident. He doesn't have a fixed place of business in any of the states in India, and then he comes to India and makes supplies within India. So he should also be registered. Number 6, person liable to deduct tax under section 51. So mainly this is the government department, and the question of TDS arises where the value of supply in a single contract exceeds 2,50,000 rupees. Right. So it is the value of the contract. How much payment is made in one time, that is not important, but what is the value of the contract in a single contract, that is important. So if the value of a single contract is exceeding 2,50,000, then deduction of the tax has to be done at the rate of 1% of the value, and that is deposited with the government, and the amount so deposited amount of the TDS will be reflected in the cash ledger of the person from whom the amount of tax has been collected. So those details we are going to discuss in sometime later, but right now the person who is liable to pay tax under section 51. The next is person making supplies on behalf of another. So this is the case of agent. Agent is always required to be registered, because when the supplies are made from the principal to agent, that is referred under schedule 1. So that is a supply without a consideration, but still that is treated as a supply for the purpose of GST. So the principal can transfer the credit to the agent, and when agent makes a further supply, he can transfer that credit to the customer. So this person should also be registered. Number 8, this is input service distributor. This is the whole topic we have already discussed prior to this chapter, the input service distributor. So this is an office of the supplier which is receiving the invoices of the input services, and if this office is registered, it can avail credit in respect of the tax which is charged on those input services, but the availing the credit is subject to section 17 subsection 5, means certain credits which are not available. So this is number 8. Now coming to number 9, these are persons making supplies through e-commerce operator. So when the supplies are made through the e-commerce operator, we never know whether the customer is going to be within the state or he is going to be in interstate. So therefore, a person who is making supplies through the e-commerce operator, he is always required to be registered. Then every e-commerce operator independently should be registered, because he is also charging a commission, and his services will also be considered as a supply. So he himself should be registered in that capacity. And then number 11, OIDAR services, online information data access retrieval services from outside India. To non-taxable persons. So the service provider, the services are OIDAR services, and the service provider is outside India, and the person who is receiving the services, he happens to be a non-taxable person, he should also be registered. And number 12, that is our general clause, that is any other notified by central government on recommendation of GST Council. So friend, these are 12 categories of the suppliers who are always required to be registered irrespective of their turnover. Right? Now you can go in the beginning of the chapter, I have given you one chart. Right? So there you can merge this thing with that chart, because in that chart, in a registration portion, I had given you three sections. Section 22, which is turnover based, section 23, which do not require registration, and section 24, those who always require registration. So here whatever we have listed, you can add it there and you can make one exhaustive chart, right? So this is the first video in this chapter, rather it is the second video, because first video is about the charts. So this is the second video. In this we have talked about who are the people requiring registration. So section 22, 23, 24, right? In the next video we'll talk about the procedure of registration starting from section 25.